Good evening, ladies and gents, and welcome back to CCCS21. Next, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you again Ambassador Pablo Kang, Australian Ambassador to Cambodia, to deliver his opening remarks for accelerating Cambodia's clean energy transition.
Okay, well, Kunjaran, thank you so much. It's great to be back here at the Climate Change Summit 2021 in Cambodia. I'm delighted to be able to chair this panel on accelerating Cambodia's clean energy transition. Of course, energy is essential for everyday life, but the energy sector also accounts for more than a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. Good news is that renewables like solar and wind are now consistently the cheapest power source. Last year, the International Energy Agency released its Renewables 2020 report that predicted renewables will become the largest source of electricity generation worldwide in 2025, so only 4 years from now, supplying 1/3 of the world's electricity. By 2030, renewables are projected to meet 80% of the growth in global electricity demand. And by 2050, wind and solar will account for over half of all electricity supply. In recent months, we've seen growing global climate commitments that will impact clean energy supply and demand. There are big opportunities to meet our climate ambitions, to create green jobs and spur investment. But there are also challenges. So what does this mean for Cambodia, and how can we best plan for and support this transition? How can we also ensure that Cambodia's electricity system is sustainable, affordable, and reliable? I'm very excited to be joined by an expert panel from government and the private sector to discuss these issues further. Now, together, the panel has over half a century of experience working in the energy sector, and I'll now proceed to ask them a few questions, and we also look forward to some audience Q&A as we go along. Som Kun.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kang. Now introducing expert panelists, His Excellency Victor Jona, Undersecretary of State of Ministry of Mines and Energy. Introducing Richard Pullen, Director of Total Solar DG. Last, introducing Bridget McIntosh, Country Director for Energy Lab Cambodia.
Well, we're very pleased to have His Excellency Victor Jona, newly promoted, congratulations, Excellency Undersecretary of State at the Ministry of Mines and Energy, to join us for this panel session today. His Excellency has been closely involved in the development of Cambodia's renewable energy assessment and integration strategy through the government's Renewable Energy Technical Working Group. So my first question to you, Excellency, the last few years has been incredible for the electricity sector in Cambodia. The grid now reaches 99% of all villages in the country, and in recent years, Cambodia's uptake of variable renewable energy has boomed, and this includes a number of solar farms that are already operating and a wind farm project that's been approved by the Cambodian Government's Investment Board. Now, of course, the electricity shortages in 2019 were tough, and COVID has reduced demand growth, I think, from 20% down to 6%. But what role do you think renewable energy now plays in Cambodia's energy transition?
Thank you very much, Ambassadors. Your Excellency Pablo Kang, Ambassador of Australia to Kingdom of Cambodia, and the lead of the session of accelerating Cambodian clean energy transition. All panels, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank to the Ministry of Environment to organize the Cambodian Climate Change Summit 21, CCCS21, and all panel join organize this event. Victor Jona, Undersecretary of State of MME, I'm very honored to join the event on behalf of the Ministry of Mines and Energy. Allow me to share Cambodian vision to meet the clean energy transition. Of course, renewable energy will play a very important role in order to meet the transition. just like to share the current power generation mix. It is composition of renewable energy, including hydro, solar, and biomass. It represents 43%. Fossil fuel, including coal and oil, it represents 32%. And power import from our neighbor countries, it represents 24%. And last week, from September 15 to 16, Brunei Darussalam, at the host country of the 39 ASEAN Minister meeting on energy and its associated meeting, it was launched the joint declaration on energy security and energy transition. Of course, each ASEAN member state now know that we still rely on fossil fuel to meet the demand, and of course, the way that we need look forward, we need to share and increase the sharing of renewable energy so that we can reduction of CO2 and also the less emission to the atmosphere. For Cambodian, of course, the government has a role to increase the renewable energy share in the system. In 2019, government endorsed the plan of 500 megawatt solar farm connecting to the grid, and at the moment, 370 megawatt of solar farm already linked to the grid, and we are under construction around 120 megawatt. And the plan are going to complete by next year. Of course, to meet the energy transition, not only renewable energy, but also energy efficiency and electrical vehicle, as said in the ASEAN Minister meeting on energy. We will formulate a roadmap so that we could achieve the target of energy transition. That is from my side. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Excellency, and we'll follow up on that shortly. But I'll go to each of our panelists and ask them a question first. So I might go to Bridget next. Bridget, I know you're joining us from Australia.
Yes, thank you very much.
Bridget is the country director of Energy Lab and brings more than 2 decades of experience supporting sustainable energy across the Indo-Pacific, including a career that spans government, private sector and research. She's currently the country director of Energy Lab Cambodia, an organisation established to support the growth of clean energy in Cambodia. And we're missing you here, Bridget. Wish you were here with us. But anyway, I wanted to ask you that you wrote an opinion piece in the Phnom Penh Post today, which I was a bit confused about because the version that I saw in hard copy was a bit different to the online version, in fact, completely different. But anyway, let's go with the online version. The online version, you were talking about China and the announcement by President Xi last week about stopping building coal plants overseas. I wanted to ask you, what impact do you think that will have on Cambodia's energy transition, noting, as you pointed out, the current electricity plan was developed in 2019 as a quick response to the power outages that year?
Thank you so much, Pablo. And thank Idom, Victor Jona, and Richard. It's wonderful to be on a panel with such people with a long history of supporting Cambodia and its energy system. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Now, in terms of China's announcement and its impact on Cambodia's energy transition, I think the first thing to note is that almost all coal projects in Cambodia have been built with Chinese involvement. And some of them are already under construction and they will continue. But for 700 megawatts in Koh Kong and 2,400 megawatts of coal in Laos that will supply Cambodia, as far as I know, they're not financed or under construction yet. So that's 3,100 megawatts of coal power that was planned for Cambodia. So this could be a big problem, or actually it could be a fabulous opportunity for Cambodia. And Pablo, you know me well, and Victor Jona knows me well. You know that I will only ever see it as an opportunity. The first reason for this is that under the current plan, Cambodia was already looking at quite a significant oversupply of electricity out of the 2019 shortages, I think there was an importance to have big projects to show that there will not be another power shortages. But with COVID, it reduced the demand quite significantly from 20% down to 6% in 2020. So that basically gives a chance for Cambodia to rethink some of those power deals. Now, as you mentioned, and has been mentioned quite a few times today, coal and gas is quite an expensive way to produce electricity. And the global price of coal at the moment is unbelievable, actually, the highest it's ever been in 15 years. Solar and wind, on the other hand, particularly solar, is extremely cheap and getting cheaper. So this allows Cambodia to take the opportunity to rethink the rest of the electricity system. At least 1,500 megawatts of coal will already be built, but the rest can be built out with the cheapest source, which is solar and wind. Now, we all know that solar is not available at nighttime, but the load for Cambodia at nighttime is also low. So we need to build a balancing mechanism for when the solar or the wind is not available. So you build out the system that takes the cheapest source of electricity first and then balances it with either storage or gas engines. I don't really want to get too technical, but I think it's really important to point out the role of gas here. Normally gas is involved in large turbines that like to stay on all the time. That's around sort of 10 cents a kilowatt hour, much more expensive, double than solar. But gas engines that can turn off and turn on really quickly and easily if a cloud goes over or if the wind drops, they only usually run about 30% of the time. So using gas to power fast response engines actually works out cheaper than going for large gas turbines or large coal turbines. So essentially, it's a massive opportunity for Cambodia to take solar and wind, the cheapest sources, and then balance it with storage and gas engines and the existing system, which includes hydro and coal. And I know that the analysis has been done, and Cambodia can have a reliable electricity system using solar and wind for the rest of electricity generation. So I can't wait for it to get started, and so that John and his climate finance facility actually have some wonderful projects to finance. Thanks so much, Pablo.
Okay, thanks, Bridget. Now, that's an interesting conversation starter as we segue now to a private sector perspective. So I'm going to ask Richard Pullen, rounding out our panel today. Richard's the Regional Sales Director at Total Solar. And of course, Richard brings both the supply and demand side perspective of the private sector to our discussion this afternoon. So Richard, forgive me for saying this, but at the beginning, you're sort of an unlikely candidate, right, to be joining us here today for a discussion on the electricity sector and climate change. You work for Total, an oil company, but you represent a new and different part of Total that works in renewable energy. So can you start by sharing with us Total's work as it relates to the energy transition and climate change globally?
Okay, thank you, Your Excellency. And yes, I was a little surprised to get the invitation, but I welcome it as it gives me the opportunity to discuss what Total, which is an oil super major, what it's doing globally, and also what it's doing in Cambodia on climate change. So at Total, we believe that energy is at the heart of 21st century's problems and challenges of climate change, reducing poverty, and supporting sustainable development. Our objectives is quite straightforward. It's to supply more people with more affordable, more reliable and cleaner energy. We fully support the Paris Climate Agreement, and we've set a very ambitious target of being carbon neutral by 2050. Now, this is a huge transformation. We understand that we have to go from being a vertical energy producer to a multi-energy company. To help that, we have put climate change in the heart of our strategy. That is to produce and supply more energy from renewable sources, whether solar, wind, gas, or especially gas, as Bridget says, and to more and more people as we go forward. Now, it's important to point out this is not a knee-jerk reaction. Okay, solar, which is my division, we've been involved in the solar business for 50 years. So we originally invested into a solar module maker in the US in 1972. And since then, we've been developing, not just in modules, but in different developments, whether battery storage, whether it's software on utility level, on residential level and commercial across the board. To give some idea of the numbers involved, we've invested, to my knowledge, 12 billion US dollars in solar, of which we've invested this year, in 9 months this year, 3 billion US dollars. So this is clearly a path forward. We clearly see solar as part of the renewable tool. We're not saying it's a silver bullet, but it is part of that toolkit that needs to be involved. We've also set some very ambitious targets for ourselves to achieve. Most importantly, 30% of the total energy mix from Total by 2040 will be 30% from renewables. This is a very big number. This is, in real terms, that's about 100 gigawatts. And we're hoping to have that as a 75% mix between solar and wind. So that's 75 gigawatts of energy from solar, is a big number.
It's about 2040, you're saying?
By 2040, yeah. Now, to give you an idea, so at the moment, after 50 years, we've done 7 gigawatts. So we've got a long, long way to go. But we're at that start and we're committed to moving forward. We've recently changed our name. And I know people think that's sort of greenwashing a little bit to change your name, draw a line in the sand. But it proves that we are committed to this. We are committed to better energy. We see renewables as the way forward, and not just in wind, but across the whole board. In certainly gas being a very important role in that as well.
Great. Well, it's a very definitive statement. Thanks very much for that, Richard. And we'll come back to you a bit later on to talk about Cambodia more specifically. I have a second set of questions now for our panellists before we go to some Q&A. So I'll start again with Your Excellency Victor Jona. It's great that your ministry leads Cambodia's Renewable Energy Technical Working Group, which is, I think, a very good example of collaboration between the Ministry of Mines and Energy, EDC, EAC, and the Ministry of Economy and Finance to develop this renewable energy assessment and integration strategy. Could you share with us the value of this work and how it fits in with the power master planning that is also underway out to 2040?
Thank you very much, Pablo. Of course, in this regard, we would like to thank the government of Australia and thanks to 3i that conduct some study on the assessment of renewable energy. And of course, the study is very useful for us. It would be the roadmap and the research paper that we could link to the long-term power master plan. In this connection, we would like to inform you that we got a technical assistance from ASEAN Development Bank to prepare a long-term PDP from 2021 up to 2040. And the study will be concluded by the end of this year. And a long vision and long development plan of PDP in Cambodia. LNG will play a very important role for power supply, including hydropower and other renewable energy sources such as solar energy and biomass. And we consider the study very important, and also it shows that we have a potential of wind power up to close to 7,000 megawatt and the rooftop solar 500 megawatt. But in this regard, for rooftop solar, we like to inform you that we need to sit together and rethinking together with the regulator, EAC, because EAC regulator have been conduct some study regarding the stability of rooftop solar. Anyway, we support renewable energy. Without renewable energy, we could not meet the energy transition and low carbon society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Excellency. Look forward to some big announcements, maybe Cambodia at COP26 on that. Okay, well, I'm now going to turn back to Bridget. So, of course, we're here, everyone, at the Cambodia Climate Change Summit. There's lots of ongoing debates, of course, about what developed countries, what developing countries can do to support climate change adaptation and mitigation. Of course, Bridget, Cambodia is a developing country. It's made huge leaps in terms of energy access, affordability and reliability, but it's also having to manage challenges like power shortages. So isn't Cambodia already doing its fair share? I mean, shouldn't you just lay off Cambodia, Bridget?
Thank you so much, Pablo. Cambodia has come so far. When I lived in Cambodia 2003, when I first met Victor Jona, and my lovely husband worked with Victor Jona, 15% of Cambodia had access to the electricity grid. Now, as you pointed out, Cambodia has achieved so much in terms of electrification. In 2016, there was no solar on the grid, and now there will soon be 450 megawatts of solar farms operating in Cambodia. And you're right, Cambodia didn't cause climate change, and Cambodia will definitely suffer from it. The analysis done by the National Council for Sustainable Development on the economic impacts of climate change to Cambodia said it could reduce GDP by 10% by 2050. Now, that is going to have a big impact for the country. So the globe, Cambodia depends on global action for climate change, but it can also take advantage of the activities and investment that have brought down the costs of technologies such as solar, wind, and batteries, but also activities relating to energy efficiency. Now, when we talk about clean energy, we hardly ever mention climate change. We only ever talk about the economic benefits that clean energy can bring to Cambodia. And if Cambodia wants to build back better and grow out of COVID, then clean energy is an excellent economic stimulus because solar and wind have no fuel costs. You pay all of it up front. It's like kind of prepaying your energy for the next 20, 30 years. So you get all that money into the economy now. It creates jobs and it brings in much needed investment. If Cambodia imports electricity from Laos, for example, we pay annually for that. And when we import coal and in the future gas, we will be paying annually for that, and it impacts Cambodia's balance of trade. So investing and switching out, for example, 3,100 megawatts of coal and building that out with solar and wind and some storage and balancing, Cambodia can create more jobs, more local investment, and bring a stimulus to Cambodia in the next 2-3 years. And what I love about solar particularly is that you can build it rapidly. In the Cambodian 2019 power shortages, the solar farm at Kampong Speu was able to be accelerated and connected to the grid early. And it was built in less than 6 months. If you contrast that with coal or gas projects that take 3-4 years to build, and then if we have similar situations like Vietnam is having, where delays in financing because of things like Japan, Korea, China not wanting to finance coal, it actually creates more disruption to Cambodia's electricity system. So yes, climate change is real. It will impact Cambodia, and no, Cambodia didn't cause it, but there is a huge opportunity for Cambodia to invest in clean energy to support its economy and grow out of COVID. Thanks.
Just a quick follow-up, Bridget. I mean, obviously, you might say that Cambodia is well placed to learn from the experience of other countries, right? For example, I know Australia's been doing a lot of work on VRE integration, including in Cambodia, and drawing on our own experience. So Cambodia's not starting from square one, so to speak.
Absolutely. And Cambodia already has hydro and coal in its system, and all of those can work together to work in orchestration for when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. Australia really is well ahead. So Cambodia, at the moment, 3% of Cambodia's electricity comes from solar. In Australia, it's significantly higher. And what that is doing is bringing learnings about how to use forecasting and technology to model when the electricity will be available so the system can be ready. I understand that the modelling that 3i have done actually demonstrates that Cambodia can have a reliable electricity system with lots of solar and wind, up to half of the electricity system from renewable energy. And it still operates successfully, and it will be cheaper than if we continue down a fossilized path of 75% fossil fuels. So you're right, the learnings are there, and I can't wait for all the support that is provided from Australia with the Renewable Energy Strategy, from AFD in modernising the grid. ADB is supporting with battery pilot and the power planning. There is so much support, and the private sector is just waiting to be able to go gangbusters and build more solar.
Thanks, Bridget. That's a good segue back to Richard, I think. He's about to go gangbusters over there. So, Richard, you've explained what Total is doing globally to support climate change mitigation. Can you now tell us about Total Solar's activities here in Cambodia? I guess what we'd like to know is what's the motivation behind it? I mean, what types of clients, for example, are you installing solar for, and why are they doing it?
Okay. So most people in Cambodia will know us for our gas stations through Total Cambodge. We have many different divisions, many different affiliates working over 130 countries. So we have a very broad expertise base. When we looked at Cambodia 4 or 5 years ago, we looked at the sectors, and we looked at residential, we looked at commercial, and we looked at utility scale solar. And our end goal was, where can we add value? Where can we come in, and where can we add our assets and our resources to help? So we chose that the commercial and industrial sector was better suited for us. And we came up with a business model which is proven to be relatively successful. The business model is an OPEX model, where Total and our engineers and our contractors will come in. We will, for a factory or an assembly plant, we will design a system, we will procure that system, and we will install that system at our cost. Now, as a business, obviously we need to be paid back, but we then enter into an agreement with the end user directly, but over a long period of time. So we can use our financial assets, we can use our expertise, and there's a number of benefits really for a lot of businesses and the grid as well. I mean, I think the customers, they have no investment and they get an energy saving. So they get a financial saving from their energy bill. Also, they have a carbon footprint, a less of a reduced carbon footprint, which is important for some, but not so important for others. For the grid, by solar operating in the daytime, in peak time, it relieves pressure on the grid at peak time. We all remember a few years ago when we had the power outs, which was in the peak time in the daytime. Now, solar is obviously operating in the daytime, so it can relieve and it can help the grid. That energy can be dispatched elsewhere, so it's better for Cambodia. And then there's an environmental aspect of it as well. If we're relieving the grid, there's less need for possibly fossil or other energy sources. So there's a number of reasons why our model works. You talk about clients and sectors. The most sort of important sector for us has been the agricultural industry. So we partnered with CP Group, we partnered with Monriti, and we've done a number of solar installations in rice mills, in producers as well. That's been easily our number one sector. We've also looked at other areas, and we believe that garments and footwear will be probably the next big industry, and we've partnered with contractors for the likes of H&M and Adidas and Nike in particular. So We see the sector growing. We see it being an important part of the energy mix within Cambodia. We think that we've got our mix right, where we don't get involved in the government's utility projects. We just concentrate on B2B, business to business, which is really our core expertise.
Right. Okay. And as you say, some of those big international companies that employ tens of thousands of Cambodians have their own internal pressures and drivers, right, to get to, I guess, their version of net zero.
We're seeing the brands are putting a lot of pressure on, and rightly so, from their consumers are putting pressure on the brands will put it on their contractors. Garments is a difficult industry, and it's probably been our most difficult one to get into. It's a very cost-sensitive industry, but we're getting it. We've made inroads this year, and we hope to expand that into next year.
Okay, well, thanks to all our panellists. You've done such an amazing job that there's very few questions from the audience. I hope this doesn't trigger an avalanche, but there's one question, and then I'd like to put that to His Excellency Victor Jona, because I think it is directed at you, Excellency. Slightly controversial, so just excuse me in advance. The question is, Cambodia has recently kicked off a new Stung Treng hydropower dam. The questioner is saying that hydro is a costly source of energy, and COVID-19 will lower the demand, already has lowered the demand of electricity. So will Cambodia reconsider this proposed project or projects like it?
Thank you, Pablo. For hydropower, I think the government will not construct the dam on the mainstream. Development of hydropower just only in the tributary of Mekong River or outside Mekong Basin. For Mekong mainstream, we do not touch because we know that it would be impact a lot to relocation of the people and others like the fish or other species. So development of hydropower just only on the tributary of Mekong or outside Mekong Basin.
Okay, I think that's fairly clear. Thank you for that statement. I thought before we move to some closing comments from our panellists, as a moderator, I'm going to exercise my prerogative here to talk a little bit about Australia's support to the energy sector, since I do have a captive audience. Of course, it's a core focus of Australia's support here in Cambodia. And 3I, our flagship investing in infrastructure program, has been mentioned a few times today. Australia is supporting the Cambodian government to develop that renewable energy assessment and integration strategy that we've been talking about. Also on the Asian Development Bank, the work that they're doing to prepare Cambodia's broader power development plan out to 2040, we're also part funding that. And I think this work together is creating a very strong evidence base to inform public policy around renewable energy. I think the early results do suggest, as has been discussed, as Bridget has mentioned already, Cambodia does have vast solar and wind resources, and that integrating them reliably and sustainably can lower total electricity costs as well. I also wanted to say, very quickly, that earlier this year we did launch a $2 million program with the Ministry of Mines and Energy to develop renewable energy mini-grids to electrify some of the most remote villages in Cambodia. I've been to some of them. They don't have access to the national grid. It's commercially unsustainable to sort of build those connections right now. So we're using mini-grids. And this project is supporting the Cambodian government to achieve its goal of electrifying 99.5% of villages by 2023. So that's my stump speech, and now I'm going to ask each of the panellists for some final observations. Again, starting with you, Excellency, I wanted to sort of touch on the role of energy efficiency. I think you mentioned it briefly in your earlier comments. This appears to be quite an important aspect of Cambodia's nationally determined contributions. And I know that the ministry has been doing quite a lot of work on finalising the energy efficiency policy, including regulations for things such as air conditioning, refrigeration, also the important work around energy efficiency and building standards with the Ministry of Public Works. So could you perhaps say a few words about that?
Thank you, Pablo. Yes, of course, energy efficiency is one of the elements for meeting energy transition. with the technical assistance from ADB, we are under preparing the national energy policy, energy efficiency policy, and hopefully the policy will be put in place by the end of this year. And also the other two topics regarding energy labeling for air condition and energy labeling for refrigerators. And of course, when the national energy policy and the two labeling, air condition and refrigerator, will be put in operation, we think we could be reduction of energy consumption for, and also it would be good for Cambodian and good for everyone, because use less of power, it means that you spend your money for other purposes. So it is benefit for our people.
Win-win.
Benefit to our people, of course.
Do you have a time frame for that, Excellency, the labelling coming?
I think we will be use application by next year, I think,
By next year.
because the draft already go to final draft at the moment.
Okay. All right, well, we look forward to that. Now I'm going to mix things up a bit. I'm going to cut to Richard now. Sorry for the lack of warning, Richard. I wanted to ask you what role you see the solar and industrial sector contributing towards Cambodia's climate change action. Some of the challenges we talked a bit about earlier about rooftop solar. So, you know, in a country like Australia, more than 1 in 4 households now have rooftop solar. But in Cambodia, it's still very much under discussion, as Excellency mentioned. Are there any subsidies for some of these measures like there are in other countries? And do you have any recommendations to increase the value that industry and solar companies like yours can bring for Cambodia?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, rooftops are difficult. Obviously, being an international company, we must make sure that the roof not only can support the solar, but not just in the installation, but for the duration. That can be 25 years. So it's very important that the roof has structural integrity. That's an area we have some issues with, more within the garment sector side of it, because a lot of their buildings are quite old and they've no designs. That's something that we have to work on, and it's sort of part of our plan. As for subsidies, we're against subsidies in the commercial sector. We believe that solar should stand on its own financially and technically within the commercial sector. I don't mean on residential, that's a different conversation, but we're actually against subsidies in the commercial and industrial sector. As for sort of recommendations, before I give sort of future recommendations, I just probably want to go back a little bit. When we first looked at Cambodia and looked at the commercial sector, I remember our first meeting I had was with the Garment Manufacturers Association, and they told us that there's just no regulations, and if a factory now wants solar, they have the risk of getting cut off, and there's a lot of rumours. So that was the low point. And since then, we've had regulations have come in. They're not perfect. And I don't mean any upset people by that, but they're getting better. And, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. So we've come from no regulations to some regulation, and they're getting better every time. And we understand through our history and our experience that it took Europe, took France and Germany 15 years to transmission. I've worked in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we have the same problems there. It can't be solved straight away. It takes time, and it's a learning process. So we fully support the government's regulations. My only slight criticism would be that we just want clarity on the way forward. Now, there's new regulations coming out in a time of use, which we fully support, but there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of sort of cross-messaging in the newspapers. So there's a little bit of lack of clarity, and that affects the industrial sector because they don't know, or they're not sure what's happening. They're asking us what we think. We're not sure, and we're the experts, and we're not sure. So there needs to be a bit more clarity. That's not a critique. It's just a way forward, that if we're going in the right way, but we need to tell people the way that we're going. So that would be really my number one recommendation.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Richard. Right. Bridget, I'm going to throw to you now, but as I'm doing so, we actually have a question for you that's coming. So you can ask that and maybe put in a free plug for Clean Energy Week or something like that. So this question is saying that there's growing evidence that solar is not always green. and there's a dark side, which is less talked about, such as things like land rights issues associated with land acquisition, land grabbing, etc., mining silica for the photovoltaics, waste generation, and so on. I was wondering if you could reflect on that in your closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Pablo. And I'm very happy to answer this question, particularly this aspect around land rights and land. I definitely am not touching on that subject, but floating solar is certainly an option that Thailand is looking to. And Thailand has made a decision to solarize all their hydro dams, which means that they will put solar panels which covers a small fraction of the reservoir. It's actually quite a bonus because then the water cools the panels and panels operate better when they're cooler. And it doesn't require land pressure. The Stimson Centre has actually done some analysis about floating hydro in Laos as well. And there is tremendous opportunity there. So certainly, for example, on Lower Sesam 2, Cambodia could install floating solar and use the existing infrastructure, the transmission infrastructure that's built there. But yes, a social license to operate and making sure that land is acquired and used for solar correctly is important. Solar can also be co-located with farming. Wind can also be co-located with farming. So it doesn't always have to be an either or option. And definitely in terms of waste and recycling, the majority of solar panels are made of glass, and that can be recycled quite easily. And when you're building solar farms, all the panels are together. They usually have a life of 20 to 30 years, and then they can all be recycled at once. So I think that's also important. I did, Pablo, if you don't mind, I might take the liberty to answer another question, which was asking about biogas and waste to energy as alternatives. And I definitely think that Cambodia has an opportunity to access biogas and waste to energy. And in fact, I spent 10 years of my career developing biogas projects in Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Papua New Guinea, and they're excellent. They depend on agricultural wastes and reliable fuel supply, and that can get tricky. So for example, one of the biogas projects in Cambodia didn't get off the ground because the tapioca starch factory went out of business, and that just is challenging. Waste to energy in terms of garbage, if it is burned at the correct temperatures, then it can produce electricity, and it can help Cambodia solve both a waste and an electricity supply problem. And it comes in around 10, 11 cents per kilowatt hour, which is roughly the same price as gas. So you asked for some closing remarks, and as you know, I've got so much to say on this topic, it's really hard to shut me up. I'm so passionate about Cambodia's potential. But at the end of the day, industry wants it, investors want it. Cambodia wants lower electricity prices. It wants reliable and secure power. And Cambodia needs an economic stimulus coming out of COVID. So it's cleaner, it's better for the economy, it's more secure. So really, it's a win-win-win, as I can add to your one there. If you want to hear more or learn more about clean energy, we are running Clean Energy Week from the 21st to the 28th of Cambodia, and that we are very grateful for the Australian Embassy support for the last 4 years since we started in 2018. There's also a podcast on Rising Giants, if people want to hear more of me talking, probably not. And go ahead and read the opinion post, either in February earlier this year or the opinion post that was published today. But I'm super grateful for the opportunity to speak on this panel today. Pablo, thank you for all your support. And Victor Jona, I love that your tireless work is really starting to pay off in the Ministry of Mines and Energy. And keep up the good work, Richard. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So 21 to 28 October is Clean Energy Week, just in time for COP26. I wanted to thank all our panellists today for their time and the audience for your attention and your questions. I think the discussion in this session has highlighted that integrating more variable renewable energy into Cambodia's grid is certainly economically possible, and modelling shows it is also technically possible to ensure a reliable grid, which of course should be one of the main concerns of any government when it comes to electricity supply. Of course, time is of the essence, and the work that Cambodian Government is doing on the Renewable Energy Assessment and Integration Strategy and their Power Development Plan up to 2040 does give Cambodia a pretty good blueprint, I think, to accelerate the clean energy transition. So that's it from us. Thanks everyone. Thank you very much everyone, and look forward to the rest of the Climate Change Summit today, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for the entire panel for your insightful information.